I still remember the exact moment my life shattered into pieces. It was Thanksgiving morning. The air smelled like cinnamon and roasted turkey, or at least it was supposed to. I had driven 6 hours back to our quiet suburban home with a car full of groceries and hope. Hope that this holiday would finally feel like a fresh start for Mark and me. Mark. I called out as I pushed open the front door, my arms loaded with bags. The house was strangely silent. No football game blaring from the TV. No clatter of pots from the kitchen. Just the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I set the bags down and walked toward the living room. That's when I saw him, Richard. My husband's stepfather. He was sitting in his worn leather armchair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. His face was pale, his breathing labored. The oxygen tank beside him hissed softly. He looked up at me with tired, knowing eyes. Emily. His voice was weak. He's gone, sweetheart, gone. The word hit me like ice water. I laughed nervously at first. What do you mean gone? Did he run to the store for something last minute? Richard shook his head slowly. A single tear slipped down his wrinkled cheek. He left last night, took most of his clothes, and every important document we had, he said. He said he couldn't do this anymore. I stood there frozen, the weight of grocery bags still cutting into my fingers. My mind refused to process it. This was supposed to be our Thanksgiving. The one where we finally talked about starting a family. The one where we remembered why we fell in love 12 years ago. But Mark wasn't coming back. Not for dinner. Not for me. And certainly not for the man who had raised him after his own father disappeared when he was just a boy. I dropped everything and rushed to Richard's side. His hand felt cold and fragile when I took it. I don't understand. Why would he leave you like this? You're sick. The doctor said, stage 4. Richard whispered. He knew. He just didn't want to watch it happen. In that moment, something inside me broke. Not just my heart, my entire picture of the man I had built my life around. I had spent years ignoring the red flags. The late nights at work, the sudden coldness in his touch, the way he looked at his phone like it held secrets he would never share with me. I spent the rest of that afternoon in a daze. I helped Richard eat a few spoonfuls of soup. I changed his oxygen tubing. I sat on the floor beside his chair while he drifted in and out of sleep, and I cried silent tears so I wouldn't wake him. Night fell. The turkey I had so carefully planned sat uncooked in the fridge. The table I had imagined setting with our wedding china remained bare. Instead, I lit one small candle and sat across from Richard in the dim living room. Tell me what happened, I whispered. Please, I need to know. Richard looked at me for a long time. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he began to speak. He told me things about my husband that made my stomach turn. How Mark had been secretly draining their joint accounts for months. How he had a woman in the next town over. How he had told Richard the night before that he was done playing caretaker and done playing husband. I begged him to stay at least until after the holiday, Richard said, his voice cracking. For you. But he said you were. You were part of the burden he needed to escape. Those words carved themselves into my soul. Burden? That's what I had become to the man I loved. That first night I barely slept. I lay in our cold bed, staring at the empty side where Mark should have been. Every memory replayed in my mind like a cruel movie. Our wedding day. The way he used to kiss my forehead every morning. The promises he made about growing old together by morning. The shock had started turning into something else. Something sharper. Something that felt almost like fire in my chest. I made Richard breakfast oatmeal with a little honey, easy for him to swallow. As I helped him eat, he looked at me with gratitude I didn't feel I deserved. You don't have to stay, Emily. This isn't your fight, but it was. Mark had made it my fight the moment he walked out that door and left his dying stepfather behind. I spent the next several days learning the truth in layers. Richard had always been kind to me, but I never fully understood how much he had sacrificed for Mark. He had poured his savings into Mark's education. He had covered our down payment on the house when we were newlyweds. And in return, Mark had treated him like an inconvenience once the cancer returned. Every story Richard shared chipped away at the love I once felt. And every gentle thank you he gave me as I cared for him started rebuilding something new inside me, strength. I didn't know it yet, but that lonely Thanksgiving was the beginning of my awakening. The days after Thanksgiving blurred together in a haze of heartbreak and responsibility. I called Mark exactly once. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message that I'm not proud of, my voice shaking with rage and sorrow, asking how he could do this to both of us. He never called back. Instead, 3 days later, I received divorce papers delivered by a courier. No explanation. No conversation. Just cold legal language saying he wanted everything split and wanted out. I sat on the porch with those papers in my lap, shaking. Richard watched me through the window, his face full of sorrow. I went inside, knelt beside his chair, and laid my head on his knee like a child. I gave him everything, I whispered. My youth, my dreams, my trust. Richard stroked my hair with a trembling hand. Some men don't know the value of what they have until it's gone, sweetheart. And sometimes they never learn. The betrayal went deeper than I imagined. As I started sorting through finances, I discovered Mark had taken out loans in both our names. He had emptied the savings account we kept for emergencies. He had even sold some of my grandmother's jewelry that I kept in our safe items I thought were still there. I felt stupid, naive, broken, but caring for Richard gave me purpose. Mornings were spent helping him bathe and dress. Afternoons were quiet conversations where he told me stories from his youth, how he met Mark's mother, how he tried to be a good father despite not being the biological one. Evenings were the hardest. The pain would get worse, and I would sit beside him, reading books aloud or just holding his hand while he slept. One night, as snow began to fall outside, Richard grew serious. Emily, there's something you need to know. I changed my will months ago. Mark doesn't know. My heart skipped. What? I left everything to you. The house. What little savings I have left. Some investments. He thought he was going to get it all. But I saw who he really was. I cried then. Not for the money, but because someone finally saw me. Someone chose me when the man who promised to love me had thrown me away. The emotional storm inside me grew darker. I would have moments of pure rage, wanting to scream at Mark, to expose him to everyone we knew. Then waves of devastating sadness that left me curled up on the bathroom floor. I stopped posting on social media. I told our friends that Richard was very ill and I was caring for him. Most of them offered sympathy, but slowly drifted away. Mark, meanwhile, was posting pictures from a beach vacation with his new woman, smiling, happy, free. It felt like a knife twisting in my chest every single time. But Richard's health was declining fast. The nights became longer. His breathing grew more labored. I hired a night nurse so I could get a few hours of sleep, but I still spent most of my time by his side. In those quiet hours, I transformed. The soft, trusting wife I used to be began to fade. In her place emerged a woman who understood pain, who understood betrayal, and who was slowly learning her own worth. Mark had left me with nothing but a dying man and a broken heart. He had no idea he had actually left me with everything I needed to rise. The final weeks were the hardest and most beautiful of my life. Richard's strength amazed me. Even as his body failed, his spirit remained generous. We talked about life, about forgiveness, about what true love really means. He told me stories that made me laugh through tears. He made me promise I would not let Mark's betrayal define the rest of my life. Then came the day I had been dreading. It was a cold January afternoon. Richard took my hand and said, "It's almost time, Emily. I need you to do something for me." He asked me to call Mark. I didn't want to, but I did it for Richard. Mark answered on the third ring, sounding annoyed. "What? Your father is dying," I said quietly. "He wants to see you." There was a long pause. "I can't right now." Tell him I love him." Richard heard everything. A sad smile crossed his face. He motioned for the phone. I held it to his ear. Mark's voice came through. Dad, Richard spoke with surprising clarity. I loved you like my own son, but you have become someone I don't recognize. I changed my will. Emily gets everything. I hope one day you understand what you lost. Mark started shouting, accusations, threats, lies. Richard simply said, Goodbye, son, and nodded for me to end the call. He passed peacefully 3 days later, with me holding his hand and whispering thank you over and over. The funeral was small. Mark showed up late, wearing sunglasses, standing in the back like a stranger. He tried to speak to me afterward, but I walked right past him. The reading of the will was even quieter. Richard had been thorough. The house was mine. The investments modest but enough to give me a fresh start were mine. Mark received nothing but a single letter. I never read it to him, but I read it myself. It was Richard's final words of disappointment and love mixed together. Mark tried to contest the will. He failed. The truth about his financial manipulations came out during the process. Friends who had sided with him quietly distanced themselves. His new relationship crumbled when the money he had promised never appeared. I sold the old house eventually. Too many painful memories. I moved to a smaller place near the mountains somewhere peaceful. I started volunteering at a hospice center, helping families care for their loved ones. The work healed me in ways I never expected. A year later, I received a message from Mark. It was an apology. A long one, full of excuses and regret. I didn't reply. Some betrayals are too deep for reconciliation. Some doors need to stay closed so you can open new ones. Today, I sit on my porch watching the sunset with a quiet heart. Richard's oxygen tank is long gone, but his lessons remain. He taught me that real strength isn't about revenge in the dramatic, destructive sense. It's about choosing dignity when everything falls apart. It's about caring for someone who needs you even when your own world is collapsing. And it's about building a life so beautiful that the people who hurt you become irrelevant. If you're listening to this and you're in pain right now, betrayed, abandoned, broken, I want you to know this. The person who left you in the dark may have thought they were freeing themselves, but sometimes they accidentally set you free instead. Thank you for being with me through this story. If Richard taught me anything, it's that love doesn't always come from the people we expect. Sometimes it comes from caring for a dying man on Thanksgiving when the whole world walks out and you. And that kind of love, it changes everything.